And then lastly, I wanted to ask you about how you go about doing your historical research in the sense of, do you find you learn more from the works by the historians, or do you like to read chronicles, primary sources, secondary, like how do you prefer to go about it?
All of the above, you know. The thing about primary sources is that were you able to go back and read the original manuscript, if you could read that kind of Latin, or if you could read those medieval languages, what you're getting, even in a primary source, is something that has already been processed through the sensibilities of the person who wrote it in the first place.
Yes.
You're seeing the filtration process at work. You're seeing political bias there. It may be unconscious, it may be unconscionable, but it's there. And so I am sort of constitutionally skeptical about accepting what is offered by any one source. Which is why I got into writing about the Knights Templar, because for hundreds of years the only source we had of information on the Knights Templar was the Catholic Church, which was supremely biased against the truth about the Templars coming out. So when I start to research a new thing like this William Wallace book that I'm working on now, I read everything I can get, and everything that I can lay hands on, and I go right across the spectrum. I read the dusty academic stuff, and I go, especially with the Knights Templar, I went right across the spectrum into the off-the-wall conspiracy theories about the Templars, and there's a lot of those out there. Read them all in the hopes of arriving within my own understanding at a comprehensive feeling that I could then translate into a good story.
Into a good story.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm doing with the Wallace. And I've discovered that Wallace, a little bit like Jesus, I didn't mean the theological thing, but Jesus came out of nowhere at the age of 28, 29, 30, and for 3 years he conducted his ministry, and then he died.
Right.
We know that. We don't know what he did for those first 29, 30 years of his life. William Wallace is the same. The contemporary records tell us that William Wallace emerged from the greenwood like a bear from its den. He was 27 years old. For 9 years, he created absolute havoc and terror for the English. And then he was caught and killed. Bang, and he was gone. We don't know what he did for the first 27 years. Now, until very recently, until 1995, historians and academics had written him off because he was more myth than man. They wouldn't believe it. But then the movie came out, Braveheart, and it kicked off a worldwide interest in this crazy character. Yeah, and in Scotland. It also launched a completely new wave of research into who Wallace was and what he did. And so most of the research I've been doing for the new book, The Forest Laird, consists of these new studies that have been done in the last 14 years, 15 years of Wallace. Some amazing stuff has come out. And so that's what I've been using as my sources. And this is not the story of William Wallace. This is a tale of William Wallace.
Okay.
Right? Yeah.
And just my last question out of curiosity is, now that you're going back to writing about Scotland, did you find of the Templars and writing about England, and are you more comfortable writing about Scotland and like kind of coming home type?
Not particularly. I went back to Scotland in September of, 2010, September of 2008, and to do some research. And when I got there, I started to look around and I thought, wait a minute, everything I'm looking at here is a ruin. You know, like Arbroath Abbey is in ruins, and it's been in ruins for 600 years. And I went looking for 14th century Scotland. because I ended up saying, okay, I got to get out of the towns, out of the villages, I got to get away from agriculture and try and find Scotland the way it was 600 years ago. It's virtually impossible to do, because you cannot look anywhere in Scotland without seeing a farmer's field somewhere that weren't there 600 years ago. Most of the country was covered in forest in those days. So that's what I went looking for, and that's what I found, and that's where I found myself identifying with, oh God, it's nice to be home.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for taking
thank you.
the time today to speak to us, and we look forward to the book coming out in this September. And thank you from medievalist.net. This is Sandra Sadowski.